The question is that the motion be agreed to. Andrew Little.
Mr Speaker, I hesitated for a moment. I was waiting for Paula Bennett to deliver her budget. But we're not going to have that today. Mr Speaker, I move that all the words after that be omitted and the following substituted. This House has no confidence in a government that has lost touch after 8 years in office, is too often focused on the few at the very top, and which is forgetting about middle New Zealanders who are just trying to get ahead. Mr Speaker, they said, make sure you start your budget speech with a joke, but I've had the wind taken out of my sails by Bill English. He started by saying, I'm presenting the budget today. Mr Speaker, that wasn't a budget. That wasn't a budget for New Zealand in 2016. That was scratched out, patchwork, hodgepodge, half measures designed to look like an economic strategy. Right. And it's not. It doesn't go anywhere near it. You'd think, Mr Speaker, 8 years on, 8 years they've had in charge of the nation's purse strings. 8 years to make their mark in history. 8 years to add to the legacy bequeathed to them by the many governments that have gone before them. 8 years to make their contribution to building this great nation. And what we've had served up to us today is no answer to the real problems being faced all across the land by all New Zealanders. 8 years they've had to help Kiwis get ahead. 8 years to help middle New Zealand. And once again, in this budget, Bill English's 8th, they have failed. This is a budget that demonstrates, yet again, they have lost touch, they don't know what's going on, and they have no answers to the problems that New Zealanders are most concerned about. The people who, as the Minister of Finance says, go out each day to work to pay their taxes, they are not helped by this budget. There are new burdens placed upon them. You just look at how out of touch this government has become. John Key, who says there is no housing crisis. Just go and ask Wins. Paula Bennett, who says there is a housing crisis. But she's decided that there's a housing crisis for 150 families who are already tenants of Housing New Zealand. They need the help. Never mind the homeless living in garages and cars, they get no help. Oh, hold on, no, there was a second announcement, wasn't there? They might get some help. Their response to one of the biggest social crises facing New Zealand is just an absolute shambles, and this budget does nothing for it. Then there's the Minister of Health, Dr Coleman, or as they call him in the health sector, Dr No. And it's not helped by this budget. It's not helped by this budget. And then we have the Minister of Finance himself, who, when he talks about the young unemployed, 18 to 24-year-olds, whose number has grown by 26,000 under that government, and he says they are pretty damn hopeless. And there's nothing in this budget for them either. Mr Speaker, we deserve better. Let's have a look at what they've done on housing. Nothing in the budget today will hardly make a difference to the real problems in our housing sector. This government is still in denial about the real problems faced by thousands and thousands of New Zealanders. $100 million for new land. Let's put that in perspective. Last year's budget provided $52 million for new land. And one of the three housing ministers, because they need so many, because, they're really on top of this problem. Well, so last year's budget got 13 hectares. 13 hectares and a few hundred houses in 2 years' time. This budget allocation will get 25 hectares, and then who knows how many houses. So after 2 years, we'll have 37 hectares and just a few hundred houses to fix a problem that is tens of thousands behind schedule. That's the real magnitude of the problem, and this budget does nothing. On social housing, they say $200 million for social housing. This is a government that has sold 2,700 state houses and hasn't replaced a single one. And they wonder why we have people now living in garages and cars in Auckland and around the countryside. They have failed. and they cannot see their failure, and they will not face up to it. That is a disgrace. None of the measures in this budget will lift home ownership rates in New Zealand. Those struggling people in Auckland who, no matter how hard they work, how hard they save, they cannot get that deposit and they will not get that first home. And this budget does not help. It will not solve the crisis. Then in health, the reality is, even with the extra money, it still does not keep up. And it gets worse, because in the subsequent years, after the financial year that this budget covers, the money goes down. It's as if the New Zealand population is going to shrink. Suddenly all the elderly who are going to be retiring, there's going to somehow be fewer of them. This is not a plan for the future. This is not a plan for a good health system in New Zealand in the future. More New Zealanders will wind up in greater pain for a lot longer because of this budget and this government's failure and this Minister of Health's failure. In education, let's face up to the stark reality of education in this budget. Operational funding is frozen. There is no extra money for every school. There is no money to keep up with the rising costs of running a school. And we know what that means. Parents whose costs of contributing to education are already rising 10 times faster than the rate of inflation, they will pay more. Their costs will go up because this government does not see that they have to support a high-quality public education system. Happy to put the money in the charter schools, but every other child in the country attending every other public school, they get nothing extra. This is not a budget for success for our children. And then in police, when so many New Zealanders are concerned about safety and security in their communities, in their towns and cities. And what do we get in the police budget? Nothing extra. Are they going to pay the police? They're going to pay the police the negotiated pay increase. No extra police, and all those police stations that have been closed by Judith Collins will remain closed and understaffed. You see, here's the thing. They're not just out of touch, they just don't care. They don't care about Middle New Zealand. They've given up. And you look at the budget projections, you look at unemployment. They say they're concerned about people out of work. By 2020, the unemployment rate for New Zealand under their economic stewardship will still be higher than what it was in 2008. That's right. This is not a budget for the future. This is not a budget for the future, Mr. Speaker. We need a government that's got to stop running our economy like it's a school gala day, with sort of, candy floss here and a few trinkets there. And we cannot have budget day turned into the quickfire raffle, where there's lots of spin, a few little sort of prizes handed out here and there, but you get home and you find it's past its use-by date. Because that's the way they're running it. That's the way they're running it. And it is time to get past the spin. You see, what we've had under this government is 8 years of the economic gains that have been made, a much, much greater share going to those at the very top, and those who work for a wage or a salary getting much, much less. Middle New Zealand missing out for 8 years, and now with the 8th budget under their belt, more of the same. We've had 8 years of skyrocketing house prices and nothing in this budget for it. A struggling health system and nothing in this budget for it. Our schools going backwards. So here's the real injustice. More and more of the cost of our public education system going on parents and families, but our school performance declining. Our school performance declining. And New Zealanders will be asking after today, what on earth is in this for us? What they'll be asking is, where on earth did we go wrong? But they shouldn't blame themselves. They shouldn't blame themselves. And even though the Minister of Finance has announced a new constitutional principle, which is that as Minister of Finance, he's not responsible for every last dollar, actually, New Zealanders will see it in a different way. Now, I've got news for the Minister of Finance. He is responsible for every last dollar, and he's going to be held to account for it. You see, let's have a look at what's happening in the New Zealand economy. Unemployment is rising, 144,000 today. 40,000 more than when that government took office. 43% of wage and salary earners in the last 12 months did not or could not get a pay rise. And yet they talk about the economic growth. We've had 2 to 3% economic growth. People working hard, people trying to get ahead. but nearly half the workforce can't even get a pay rise. That's not fair. More and more of the share of the economy going to those doing very well and less to those doing the hard work. That's not right. And we know that that slice of the economy that only a few years ago workers shared in, now the effect of that government's economic management means that on average, the average New Zealand household this year is $50 a week worse off. That's their economic management. That's the difference. And we still have poverty. 300,000 kids living below the poverty line. And I've talked about young people, the 18 and 19-year-olds not in education, employment or training, 26,000 more than when that government took office. That's not a path to the future. That's not a path to success. And in housing, where do you start? Where do you start? You know, here's the stunning thing. In March this year, as the country was basking in summertime temperatures and what should otherwise have been autumn, contemplating their futures, houses in Auckland, sitting there doing nothing, rising in price by $2,200 a day. Not a week, not a month, a day, $2,200. That's not a property market. That is a bubble that is dangerous and unstable and is no good in a properly managed economy. That explains why we have the lowest level of home ownership in 65 years. It's why we have people in Auckland and in other parts of the country who can no longer even afford to rent something reasonable. That's why they're living in shocking conditions, and this government's got nothing to say to them about it. I want to say this. The gap between the increase in the value of wages and the increase in property prices in New Zealand now is getting out of control. We are the second in the world for the worst ratio between incomes, personal incomes and property prices. We are beaten by one country, Qatar. And I'm saying to our Qatari brothers and sisters, don't get too cocky. Don't underestimate how focused Nick Smith and that government is on making it even worse for New Zealand. The housing policy is a shambles. Nick Smith cannot do anything. He promised thousands of houses and 500 hectares. We'll have 2 years on, we'll have 37 hectares and a few. Paula Bennett running around trying to rescue the 150 who have a roof over their heads already. There's 4,500 families around the country waiting to get a state house, and she thinks the crisis lies with those already in one. It is just ridiculous. It is just ridiculous. They are simply not serious. They've given up. And then on education, we know how important education is. I mean, housing is very important because you've got to get people in a stable house so that when the kids go to school, they get to go to that school month after month, year after year. Not what's happening in a lot of schools at the moment around the country, where schools are reporting turnover of 25% of children because their parents cannot hold on to the same house. Tossed out of house after house, kids moved from pillar to post, cannot get a stable education, and that's damaging them too. They don't care about that. You see, they don't see it in those terms. They just don't care. They fudge and mudge, they fiddle and faddle, and they faff about because they don't have an answer. That's the way they approach it. Education is just as important. Education is the great leveller. It is the way you lift yourself up, you get skills, you find out what's going on, and you get to the end of your education and you're equipped and you're prepared for the world. That's what we used to boast in New Zealand. We used to boast a world-class education system. We don't anymore. We're slipping down the ranks internationally. We used to be 5th in reading in the world, and now we're 13th. We used to be 7th under the last Labor government in science, now we're 18th. We were 11th in maths in the world under the last Labor government. Today we are 23rd. Standards are falling, and they've got no answer. And their budget today, they freeze funding for primary and secondary schools. Out of touch, don't care. That's who they are. Their priorities are all wrong, and the parents are paying more for it. And in health, we know what the impact is of 6 years of routine underfunding of health. Now $1.7 billion behind. They've added another 600 odd million. It won't be enough to keep up. And worse, their projection is they're going to start winding back the funding in subsequent years. It is just plain crazy, and it is out of touch. And the impact on real people's lives is they cannot get the treatment they need. 160,000 people in the last 5 years who cannot get to see a specialist. Or when they do get to see one, they get specialists saying, I'd like to treat you, but there is no money. We can't treat you. And so people now living in debilitating pain, spending their days on the sofa or on the bed because they can't move, desperate to wait to get their surgery. And so desperate in many cases, they now have to raid their retirement savings, that little nest egg that keeps them secure for the rest of their lives, raid that to get surgery that 5 years ago and under a Labor government they would have got. National won't face up to these problems. National won't face up to these problems. National won't stand up for Middle New Zealand, but the Labor Party will. The Labor Party will. And everything that the Labor Party will do in government will be about getting all New Zealanders a chance to get ahead. We'll diversify the economy. We'll diversify the economy. It'll be helped, of course, by the Our Work, Our Future bill that symbolically was drawn today. If ever there was some sort of, fatalistic symbol that New Zealanders do really want things to be going in the right direction, it is that piece of legislation that harnesses the power of procurement of the government and actually focuses on adding jobs in New Zealand, not overseas. Do they have an answer to that? No. They don't care about it. They don't care about it. We will introduce research and development tax credits. We won't have the kind of Stephen Joyce sit-on-high system and toss out a little bit of funding here and a little bit there. That's not the way you get economic development going. Research and development tax credits, government procurement that's going to create jobs in New Zealand. We will invest in long overdue infrastructure spending, not the repeated announcements we've seen in this budget from previous budgets. Taranaki, still waiting for that upgrade of State Highway 3, still waiting for their upgrade of State Highway 3. And we will invest in more skills and training. Labor's ideas will kickstart the economy and it will be fair for everyone. We will deliver a fair share for Middle New Zealand. And in housing, we operate by one principle: we will build more houses. And we will do whatever it takes to build them. There will be new houses. They will be sold to those people struggling to save their deposit and get it. They will be affordable. And for those who need a state house or a social house, there will be more housing for them too. And we will embark on that program. It'll be realistic, practical, and it will solve the problem. And those who are suffering at the sharp end of the crisis right now, they will have their problems fixed. Nothing less will do. And in education, we will make sure that more and more of the cost that is being foisted on families and parents right now will not continue. And we will have a world-class education system with teachers that are focused on teaching and spending time with the children and getting the best out of them and helping them succeed, because that's what we need. And because we at least understand the future of work and the need for skills is changing and is getting more elaborate and sophisticated, we will fund 3 years post-school education and training. People will get that for free, because that's what a modern economy will demand, and it will be way better than what this government's doing, which right now is precisely nothing. Mr. Speaker, we will have a health system again that will be the envy of the world, where people who need treatment, they need their elective surgery and they need their operations, they can get it. And it will be done over a sensible period of time, but it will restore the routing that this government has inflicted on our health system, and people will be better off for it. And we will have a Farm Act that can provide the new life-saving medications, even if it is initially on a short-term basis, so New Zealanders can live with a sense of security once again. Mr. Speaker, this budget has failed to deliver for Middle New Zealand. Today will be a day of deep disappointment for most New Zealanders. They won't get their fair share. This budget won't reduce child poverty, it won't lift employment, it won't fix Auckland's housing crisis, it won't help our kids learn better, and it won't undo the savage health cuts that this national government has inflicted on our health system. Here's my message, Mr. Speaker. This government isn't delivering for you, but Labor will. That's right. We are the party for all New Zealanders to get ahead, to have a chance to build opportunity and have a sense of hope and security for the future. That's what this budget called for today. It has totally and utterly failed. Mr. Speaker, Labor is ready to serve.